Once again, thank you for inviting me to this activity. Happy to be here and to share what we're doing locally in the Caribbean region and how can this network can also be useful to collaborate in other places and in the continental US. My name is Pablo Mendez-Lazaro. As Philip mentioned, I work at the University of Puerto Rico. I've been working there for 14 years, mainly with analyzing the climate change impact on public health, developing equitable climate adaptation strategies, and working with ecosystem services. In this case, I'm going to be speaking on behalf of the most recent research program that we have in the Caribbean, which is called the Caribbean Climate Adaptation Network. It's a network that is funded by the NOAA RISA program, and we started almost 1 year ago. So we're entering literally in the second year. And if I turn off my camera, please excuse me, it's because I have a little guy behind me, some cases, because the school is closed. So sorry for that. Okay, so there are a few climate adaptation partnership programs, NOAA CAPS, nationwide, including the Pacific Islands, Alaska, the Northeast, and some others in the central US, and also in the northwestern part as well. So the Caribbean region is the newest one. So this is the program that was called the former RISA, which meant regional integrated science assessments. But now it's a new, they're using a new name, which is Climate Adaptation Partnership, which is mean that what they do have here is that we need to create usable information that is applicable for decision makers. So directly working with end users that can help to increase the capacity locally and regionally, that provide novel climate solutions. So also working with the climate model projections and climate analysis, climate data, building alliances, collaborations, and partners. In the case of us, I'm going to be speaking the kind of collaboration that we're building at different layers and different scales, and promoting collaborative research. So in this case, we're also collaborating with different programs that are running in the Caribbean region, mainly in Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands, but also with some other islands in the Caribbean. So who are we? We are 12 different institutions, not only academic institutions, working together. So we are covering academia from Massachusetts down until South Florida, the University of South Florida, and going into the West in Austin, Texas, with the University of Texas. And then we have also the Forest Service, the Department of Agriculture, but the International Institute of Tropical Forestry, which is the region that is locally here in Puerto Rico. And also we are counting with the University of Virgin Islands that is representing most of the collaborators, partners, and investigators that are working with us in this research network. In terms of the collaborators, we started with a few at the beginning. We had at the beginning at least 12 to 13 different collaborations from federal agencies to community-based organizations and state agencies. Nowadays, after 1 year, we can say that this network is getting bigger, and now we have almost like 40 different collaborators in the Caribbean region. So this is the research team. Please excuse us because I don't have all of the pictures and names for the amount of graduate students that are working with us. But this is the core research team, if we want. Okay, so we have engineers. This is a multidisciplinary team composed by engineers, ecologists, oceanographers, climatologists, social scientists, and public health as well. So it's a very diverse team in terms of disciplines, but also geographical regions, gender, and ethnicity, which is very representative of what we are in the United States and in the Caribbean region. We're working with, obviously, the principle of JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I'm showing this diagrams and infographic because I'm sure that most of you are familiarized with this kind of language, but also with this same pictures that they're using in some other presentations. But in reality, what we're trying to answer is, what does it mean to work with equity? What does it mean to work with justice? It's pretty simple to show a picture like this, and it can help to visualize what we're aiming to do. But in reality, how do we build that ladder that we're seeing in the left side of the panel that is showing when we're talking about justice, for example? What does it take to build a ladder like that to work with justice, climate justice, environmental justice, with diversity and inclusion, right? Those are the kind of things that we need to figure it out that we don't know. Sorry, my little kid was asking me for something. Also, so in the right side, so again, equity, equality, and justice. Sorry, I was a little bit distracted by my little one. But again, this is important. Yes, actually, let me tell you a story, right? So when we're talking about also about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, I learned a lot with my kid when we're talking about inclusion. Usually when we're thinking about inclusion, we're thinking on gender, we're thinking on sex, we're thinking on ethnicity, we're thinking on race. But for example, in most of the cases, we're also forgetting about people with special needs, right? And it's amazing how much we can learn from people that are on those kind of spectrum, right? So my kid is autism. So the way on how we explain these populations, this kind of information is very different on the kind of techniques and methods and approaches that we're using with other peoples, right? So I literally, I'm not an expert, but when we're talking about inclusion, I learned that this is another kind of population or groups that need a special attention and need a special methods and approaches to be able to transfer this kind of information and knowledge for them and make it accessible as well. So again, diversity and inclusion is even more complex on the kind of general definitions that we were using a couple of years ago. Nowadays, it's a little bit more complicated, right? So that's part of the game in this network. We're trying to define those concepts locally for the Caribbean. What does it mean? And how to build the different ladders to be able to satisfy each of these different terms. What we're aiming to do is to work on developing a network that is able to help on adaptive capacities for the future, for climate extreme, to help for governments, NGOs, and the different stakeholders to plan responses and adaptation methods to cascading climate hazards, and also the governance crises. As you might heard, the Caribbean region is not only facing climate crisis, climate change, and extreme weather events, but we're also facing a lot of different governance obstacles, barriers, lack of fundings, and a lot of different political, economical situations, right? So in order to work with climate change in the Caribbean, we also propose a human-centered design approach. And this kind of approach means that we can consider ourselves as experts. We're scientists or working on this kind of information and data. We have been analyzing climate data for multiple decades and years. And so we probably know what is happening. But to be honest, that doesn't mean that we know more than others, right? And that we know specifically what the others needs in order to overcome their own barriers and challenges. So in order to do that, we are getting ourselves as peers, and we are not so-called expert. We are here to help as advisors, but to help you co-design and to co-produce your own solutions, your own climate adaptation strategies, and your own plans to be better prepared for climate change. And how do you do that? By using the human-centered design. And the human-centered human design means that you start working with the people most affected by the problem to be solved, right? So instead of just getting to a community of residents that is being affected by floods, that are being affected by extreme heat, that are being affected by coastal erosion. So instead of just getting there and say, so we have the magic stick and the solution for your community to be better prepared for these kind of hazards. So we sit down on a table, we'll listen. We start by listening to the community, to the traditional knowledge that they have, the kind of challenges that they're facing that are coupled with the extreme weather events. And after that, is what they're making them, all of the combination, all of the different factors is what they're making these communities more vulnerable. But that doesn't mean that they don't have the resources, that they don't have the capacity, or that they don't have the knowledge, right? So we should never misunderstand that the community doesn't have that capacity. So we have the data, okay, perfect, that's a different story. And those are the kind of things that we can provide to the community, because they were lacking for some kind of a specific information in order to find the better solutions for their communities. Well, there are some other kind of communities, right? So we can work also with the stakeholder communities. We can work with the government, with some kind of agencies, federal government, state government, municipal government. So at the different layers, identifying what are the barriers and how the human-centered design can be successful in understanding the risk, perceptions, and barriers that all of the different communities are facing to be prepared for climate change. So the main goal is a knowledge action network that is designed to help. This is something that I mentioned already, so I will not read it again. I read it. I said it in the previous email. I talk about the human-centered design, I think. So sorry, I was in advance. This is our research, so we know what we're doing and how we're working with this kind of designs. So in the terms of identifying the different layers and the different scales of actions that we're working, so we propose to work at the regional level, at the macro level, meaning that expanding and enhancing and promoting collaborations, partnership, and alliances with different islands as well in the Caribbean region. And I will explain a little bit later how we are going to be doing that and specific, right? And the meso level is the one what we're calling both territories, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. So we're working in the U.S. Caribbean territories, both territories we are U.S. citizens for almost 100 years or even more in the case of Puerto Rico. And we are like 4 million inhabitants in total between the two territories. In the case of Puerto Rico, we have one big island that have almost 3 million people, and the other two municipalities, Culebras and Vieques, that are also that they also have population. In the case of Virgin Islands, are only like 90,000 people, where they're distributed in 3 different islands, being San Thomas, the capital island, if you want. San Croix is the most industrialized island, and San John is the most nature conserved island in the U.S., Virgin Islands. And then moving to the third layer, that is working with the micro communities. So instead of just we're working with the federal government, we're working with the region, because they're part of things that we can learn from other islands on what they're doing to be better prepared for example, for hurricanes, what they're doing for sustainability, what we're doing for energy justice, and those kind of things. So then working at the community level is important, because we might be able to be that link for communities, for community-based organization, to start first working with state agencies and federal agencies. So we are here as that communication piece or communication channel that is able to open those doors to those opportunities to happen. And I will show also clear examples on what we're doing. Obviously, we're working on climate change. So when we're working on climate change, most of the climate hazards that are listed worldwide are occurring in the Caribbean region. So we are islands, almost 60% of our population are living near the coast. We're facing coastal floods, sea level rise that is affecting essential infrastructures in our coastline, energy, water, also communities that are living nearby, coastal flood and coastal erosions. We're facing drought. So drought are also associated with water scarcity. And most of the islands in the Caribbean region doesn't have big reservoirs to capture superficial waters, right? So drought and a reduction in precipitation is having huge impacts in the Caribbean region as well. But also in the other side, we're receiving also extreme precipitation, so dealing with floods. So in the other side of the belt, we have too many amount of water in a short period of time that we need to deal with. and those kind of things happen as well. Most of the time associated with tropical storms as well, but not all of them. We don't have too many wildfires, although recently we are seeing more frequent wildfires than we used to see before. So that's something new. And also tornadoes. All of a sudden, we have been experiencing 2 or 3 tornadoes occurring in the west coast of Puerto Rico. So scientists are getting concerned. This is something that is going to be a trend, and this is something that is going to be more normal in the Caribbean region, in our islands. But to be honest, it wasn't something that we were used to see before. But now in 1 year, for example, we face 2 or 3 different tornadoes in the west coast of Puerto Rico. Extreme heat, that's another important issue, that not because we're living in the Caribbean region, we are used to heat, right? Extreme in combination with humidity is increasing the heat index. And where we're seeing the wet bulb temperatures, for example, one of the combinations, if not already apparent temperatures, is the combination as well of humidity, temperatures, wind directions, ventilations, and so many other variables that need to be considered when we're talking about thermal comfort. So the heat index in the Caribbean region is getting way too warm on what we were used to be before as well. Not to forget that we are on the highways for tropical storms and hurricanes. So we're also working on how to be better prepared and better adapt for powerful tropical storms occurring in the Caribbean region. So again, we are working with most of the extreme weather events that all of us are familiarized with. Most of the countries worldwide are facing. So in that regard, we're not alone. The only difference is that all these climate hazards are also interacting with the social determinants of health, the political conditions, and the government actions, right? So as it was already mentioned in the NCA 5, in NCA 4, sorry, the National Climate Assessment 4 in 2018. So these climate stressors are interacting with the institutional context, meaning how prepared or how better, how well prepared are our institutions to address each of these different hazards. Are we developing laws? Do we have programs? Do we have plans? Do we have budgets to address the problem that we are identifying? Those are the institutional context, right? And in the other side, we have also the individual and community context. When we're talking about the profile of the population, who is going to be experiencing and living these kind of hazards? Are we talking that people, wealthy, young people, into 20 to 25 to 30 years old, or we're talking about elderly with a lot of pre-existing health conditions, chronic diseases, living below the poverty level? So not only looking at the climate scenarios, but also considering how these climate scenarios are going to be interacting with the local conditions in each territory, right? So most of us also are aware that we are breaking temperatures record, and we mark a new record for global temperatures in terms of during the summer. Not only in air surface temperature, but also it's something that happened in the ocean. So the reason why, for example, in the Caribbean region, we are already in late October, entering November next week, and we're still facing heat advisories and heat warnings from the National Weather Service locally in Puerto Rico, because in most of the cases, the temperatures are reaching or above 110 degrees Fahrenheit in terms of heat index, and we went up to 125 during this summer, which are dangerous conditions for vulnerable population. And that is happening not only, obviously, because of El Niño. That was something that I was mentioned and explained. It was a consensus that the World Meteorological Organization published back in May 17, 2023, right before entering the summer of 2023. And right in the point, they just released this kind of report, and Puerto Rico was breaking temperatures and making new records, but way above the normal already during the first week of June. And since then, we have been experiencing his warning and heat advisories that being issued by the National Weather Service. These are some of the examples, but to be honest, this is not the first time that Puerto Rico has been also experiencing heat, extreme heat in the region. So lucky, the National Weather Service, in collaboration with the University of Puerto Rico, developed the first early warning system for heat. And it was meant, obviously, to protect the public health, mainly for vulnerable groups. So since 2018, we had that tool in place. But it was only for a couple of places, and it wasn't lasting too much, and it wasn't that long. In the case of 2023, just for your knowledge, I don't have the specific data to show or graphic here, but in 2019, 2020, and 2021, there was only a few heat warnings and heat issues and excessive heat issues. But in 2023, I remember that the National Weather Service showed that they have been releasing almost 49 different warnings for Puerto Rico. 49, that means it's huge, right? When you're considering that one period had, the summer season had 90 days, for example. So considering that you have already 49 days of, out of the 90 days that were under extreme heat, that's a real concern, right? And that's new. That's something that is happening new. Cascading effects and compound effects. That's another issue and another barrier and complex situation that we need to face in the Caribbean region. So we know that heat is the fuel for hurricanes, but something that we were able to identify recently is that, let me move this. This is a research recent manuscript that we released a couple of years ago. It was in 2022. So during the peak of August and September, the Caribbean region is very warm, and the sea surface temperatures are also very warm. And this heat is part of the fuel for the hurricane formations, right? Part of it is not the only factor to consider. But what we discover in this manuscript is that right after this powerful storm passed through the Caribbean region, there is also a heat episode in the aftermath of this tropical storm. So, and that happened after Hurricane Maria. After Hurricane Maria, in the case of Puerto Rico, with all of the forest destroyed, all of the ecosystem services lost because they were unable to provide thermal regulation, obviously, because they lost most of their leaves, the trees were destroyed, all of the green infrastructure was destroyed because of the hurricane. We don't have any electricity. And right after Hurricane Maria, we faced a heat episode that it lasted for 11 days without energy, without air conditioner, without green infrastructure. So without unable to mitigate the extreme heat episode that the people were facing. Thousands of people died after the Hurricane Maria in the aftermath, not during the hurricane. Thousands of people, almost 3,000 people in the 14 days after Hurricane Maria. So the attribution is still unclear. There are multiple factors to consider: the lack of electricity, the extreme heat episode, the lack of healthy conditions, the lack of water, potable water, insufficient healthy food, multiple factors, right? But one thing that it can be considered, because we have the information, is that it happened an extreme heat episode that it lasted for 11 days, consecutive days. And we were able to continue seeing this kind of problem with recent hurricane. So Hurricane Maria occurred in 2017 in the Caribbean region, and Hurricane Irma as well. But recently, in September 2022, with Hurricane Fiona, happened exactly the same thing. Right after the strike of Hurricane Fiona, the electric system collapsed, which is something that is happening very often in most of the places when you are struggling with this kind of hazards, right? But when you are also having only 27% of the population with electricity, almost or 40% of the population is facing extreme heat conditions. And as I mentioned, most of these extreme heat conditions, as you can see, are in the coastlines. But 60% of the population in Puerto Rico live in the coastline. So actually, when you're seeing these kind of maps, you can identify that a huge chunk of the population is being exposed to extreme heat conditions without electricity to mitigate the extreme heat episodes, right? And it lasts for days and days. The Hurricane Fiona strike on September 18, and this excessive heat risks are from September 17th, 23rd, and in September 23rd and September 2021, we only have like 30% of the population only with electricity, right? So this is another compound effect. We learn how to be better prepared for wind in our household. We learn how to struggle with floods, with rainfall, because we are not, if you say it like that, we're not dying during landfall. People are not being impacted during landfall. People are being more impacted in the aftermath of the hurricane. So we need to learn on how to recover quickly and how to be better prepared and to respond to these cascading efforts, right? But what is amazing, and this is the reason why we have the CCAN, the Caribbean Climate Adaptation Network, is to bring all this kind of information together to provide the best science available for the government to improve decision-making activities. But what we're seeing here is right after Hurricane Maria, when thousands of people died, when we have a lot of evidence working with federal agencies, with different academias in Puerto Rico and in continental US that are providing evidence that heat episodes and extreme heat is becoming a huge concern for Puerto Ricans. That we have evidence that people are dying, hospital admissions are increasing, as in many parts of the world. This is not new, but what is surprising is that the government of Puerto Rico this kind of analysis for hazards and risk, identifying their main priorities to work and to be better prepared for the next couple of years. And it's surprising how fog and hail are even more important for the government than high temperature. As we're seeing here, the bigger the column, the most important is the risk for the government of Puerto Rico. And in this case, we're seeing that higher temperatures is not identified as a priority for the government. But people are dying, people are complaining. The National Weather Service is issuing because they are considering as well that we are reaching dangerous conditions for population. So we do have a lot of evidence to provide that. But for some reason, the government is not using the best science available to make this kind of decision, right? Again, we are hoping, this is only one. I'm not saying that all of the different agencies are considering this as true. We are working hand by hand with the Puerto Rico Department of Health. We are working with the Emergency Management Agency in Puerto Rico as well to do capacity buildings, identifying risk and vulnerabilities. So CCAN is aiming to change this kind of information and to provide whatever the government needs in order to identify the real risk that the population in Puerto Rico are facing. I already talked about the social determinants of health, but again, I think that this is one of the most important things. We have a lot of data in terms of how the climate is changing. We know how in temperatures are increasing in the Caribbean region, how the sea level rise is also affecting coastal communities. But what is still lacking is, as I mentioned at the beginning, what will be the profile of the population that will be facing these hazards? And these are the social determinants of health. And the social determinants first are the conditions in which the populations, individuals, and communities live, are born, work, and die, right? So again, age, race, ethnicity, pre-existing health conditions. If you have diabetes, if you have cancer, and you are receiving chemotherapy, and if you are receiving chemotherapy, most likely you are also experiencing hot flashes. And if you are receiving chemotherapy and you are facing hot flashes, but you're living below the poverty level, and you are under extreme heat episodes, and you don't have the budget or the money to pay for the electricity bill because you're using your budget to pay for the medicines, and the treatment. So most likely you are going to be under the vulnerable group for extreme heat, right? So those are the kind of conditions that we need to consider that are very difficult to work with. We cannot control the climate. We cannot control what will happen. We can mitigate and we can stop the rate of action of what is happening. But we need what the kind of things that we can work with are all of these conditions. We can work on better employment. We can work on improving the quality of life. We can work on health insurance. We can work on the local economy, right? Those are the kind of things that we can control relatively easy for the government. And this is the reason why we have governments in all of the territories, right? To work with us, to be able to co-design these strategies to provide quality of life and well-being to all of their citizens, right? So we need to pay attention to these things. And it's interesting because, again, for the first time in the IPCC, the most recent IPCC, they're considering population. So the scenario is not, it doesn't mean anything on climate scenario if we don't know who is going to be affected or not, right? What kind of people are going to be facing these scenarios and the conditions on how they're going to be living and experiencing this, right? Are they're going to be, they're going to have the enough tools and the strategies, programs and plans to overcome these issues? Or they're going to be facing exactly the same barriers that we are struggling now in 2023, right? So the kind of decisions that we're making now are the ones that are be able to help for future population. Again, we might be able to stop the rate of change in climate, but there are multiple other things on social determinants of health that we can change, that we can modify our behaviors, our risk, our own vulnerabilities and factors that make us more vulnerable and sensitive. We can improve our capacity to cope, right? By working with those social determinants of health. So where we are in SICAN, right? So since we're using the human-centered design during the first year, I already talked about the different climate hazard. We don't want to repeat analyzing heat and how temperatures are increasing in the Caribbean region. That is something that modelers and forecasters are doing, and we do have modelers and forecasters in our research team as well. So that available science, that science is available as well for us. So what we're doing is that we are working, I mentioned that we're working at 3 different scales, at the macro level, meso level, and the micro level. So for the micro level, we are collaborating. We have developed a partnership with the Foundation for Puerto Rico, where they are working with 79 different entities, island-wide, on adaptations and resilient plans with community-based organizations. So we are like science advisors on how to make sure that these communities and these entities, they are representing hundreds of thousands of people in Puerto Rico, that they do have the best science available in terms of climate change, obviously to propose then adaptation strategies that are responding to the kind of hazard that they are going to be facing. Right? So we are working directly hands on doing workshops, meetings, and providing science. In the other side, we also, below that square, we have the National Weather Service. So I was one of the responsible developing the first early warning system for the National Weather Service in Puerto Rico, since we started working since 2012, and we released the first version in 2018 after a couple of pilots and approval from NOAA. So now it's in place. It has been in place for at least 5 years running. But given the summer that we experienced in Puerto Rico, all of the thresholds that we identified and the different layers and levels of risk, they need to be revised. So we're working with the National Weather Service, and this is something that they ask us to help, right? On identifying, to update that information that we had and that we did in 2018, and to see what is working, what is not working, and how can improve that. But also working with the Initiative of Climate Ready Nation. So the National Weather Service offices are the responsible also to provide capacity building on climate for all of the communities in the different regions, right? So the San Juan office is the one responsible of providing that kind of information to Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands. So we're building collaboration for our team to help them as well to work with the communities and to do this kind of activities. In the right side, we have the CARICUS and the Ecoexploratorio, but also the Puerto Rico Department of Education. So again, this is a human-centered design. During the summer, everybody was very concerned about extreme heat, and there were a lot of things going on in our school because they lack of the infrastructure to mitigate the extreme heat episode. So teachers, students, and most of the employees in our public schools, they were getting impacted by heat. And so continuity of the operations, they were impacted in the school. So I had a meeting with the secretary of the Department of Education in Puerto Rico, and we are working directly on adaptation strategies for heat and protocols on how to respond for heat during heat extreme episodes in Puerto Rico at the educational level, considering not only learning experiences, but also public health of the employees. So we have students, but we also have the employees that need to protect. Below in the center, we have climate adaptation that we are working, as I mentioned, with the Emergency Management Agency. So the Emergency Management Agency, the state one, is the one responsible of working directly with FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, right? So that's one of the most important agencies in Puerto Rico when we're talking about hazards. So we have 78 municipalities. Each municipality in Puerto Rico, they need to have a risk mitigation and risk mitigation plan. But from now on, they need to include adaptation strategies for climate. And this is a requirement that FEMA is doing for the municipalities if they want to be eligible for the future extreme events impacting their communities, for them to receive funds to recovery. So they're asking our help on how to start considering climate adaptations into their plans and their programs. And at the chart below, what we're seeing is that recently we became part of the Local 2030 Island Network. Local 2030 Island Network, obviously we are islands, right? So we need to work with islands in the Caribbean. So the Local 2030 is a United Nations network aiming to work on sustainability and climate adaptation for most of the islands worldwide. In our case, we're going to be working mainly with the Caribbean islands, but we're also working with other islands in the Pacific that are part of NOAA as well, and part of this Local 2030 Island Network community. This is the web page. This is where you can find a lot of information. This network also is sponsored by the United States Department, State Department, and also by NOAA. The reason why you're seeing the logos right here. And also, obviously, we are recently included in this network aiming to work with the Caribbean region on climate adaptation. Mainly as I mentioned, this is a network that was built in 2019 at the United Nations and aiming to give a voice for islands for climate adaptation, given that the islands are going to be the territory most affected by climate change. So now this network is aiming to work in all of the Sustainable Development Goals joining efforts. Okay, these are the kind of islands that are part of it. Puerto Rico recently became part of this network. We have a couple of islands in the Caribbean. So the idea is to work with these islands during 2024 and 2025, doing exchange programs and exchanging knowledge and platforms. Another opportunity on how to continue increasing our network and providing science on what we're doing is that we build an alliance with the American Society of Adaptation Professionals, ASAP. So to do workshops and capacity buildings. So ASAP is providing these sessions that already started. They recruited more than almost 70 people, I think, nationwide from different regions. All of the NOAA CAPS programs became part of it. And we will have a specific date on November 9 where we will have the opportunity to explain to more actors and potential new partners on who we are, what we're doing, and how can we collaborate with the kind of model information and resources that we have available for the region. This is only part of the team during the first planning meeting that we had. I'm right here, the ball with the kid again is again with me. Because he's autist, as I mentioned, and when the school is closed, it's very difficult to find someone to take care of him. So so he's always or in meetings or participating in activities with me when the school is closed. Thank you for your attention, and now I will leave it open for questions, comments, or concerns. Again, thank you for being here, and Philip, the floor is yours. Let me know.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Pablo, for that great presentation. And I'll just say I'm very pleased that your son was here in the webinar with us. So we're pleased to have him a part of this as well. So there are a couple questions in the chat right now, and they both have to do with hurricanes. So I'll go ahead and read them. But I do just want to say for everyone else, if you have questions, comments, you can put them in the chat. You can put them in the Q&A. Feel free to do that. We have about 15 minutes or so to discuss some of the topics that might be on your mind. So first one is, it's from Barbara. Take a look at Hurricane Otis, which just hit Mexico. Water temps are at 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So I know you talked about some of those things. And then Ricardo said, we saw during recent hurricanes affecting coastlines, the families of medium low income that have been living in those areas their whole life are facing displacement and losing their property and not being able to rebuild, and are affected by the code enforcement and new building regulations. Some of them are forced to sell to investors with much more money. How can we protect these families and help to maintain a balance on coastline properties? So I'll let you address those.
Yeah, actually, this first one is more like a comment. So take a look at the Hurricane Otis, right? Exactly, that is something similar of what is happening nearby in the Caribbean region. So we are not only seeing superficial or extreme heat episodes with air surface temperature, but we're seeing it also in the sea surface temperature. So it's a ocean heat wave, what we're seeing in the Caribbean region as well. So lucky for us, most of the tropical storms this year never entered into the Caribbean to get more powerful as it happened in years before. But the hurricane season still not finished. So still hope that everything continue like that, because the surrounding waters in the Caribbean region are still very, very, very warm, as you mentioned there. In terms of the coastal communities that are being affected, absolutely. Coastal communities mainly in the coastline, right? Because the coastal definition for coastal community can go up to 1 kilometer inland, right? So 1 kilometer inland in most of the cases are not necessarily affected by ocean physical hazards, but they can be affected by inland physical hazards, like riverine floods, urban floods. So yes, they're like the ham in the middle of the sandwich, right? So absolutely. So how can we help? That is something that is very critical. And it's happening in underserved communities, mainly in Puerto Rico, where most of these communities, as the people that Ricardo is mentioning here, they were not complying with the regulations. They didn't have the authorization from the government to build their residences or their homes. All of a sudden, partially, their homes or their house get partially destroyed by 50% or something like that. They were unable to do the repairments that were needed. So there are in the coastline, in the Caribbean region, what we're seeing is that people with high incomes that are coming to these communities and starting to buy to do Airbnbs. That is something that is happening in different places of Puerto Rico. So that's part of the displacement. the displacement that the underserved communities and disadvantaged communities are facing in Puerto Rico are not only related to the physical hazards, but also to the market values. These are probably houses that are in the front of the beach in the Caribbean region. For people living below the poverty level, they are unable to cost or to pay for the repairments, but high-income communities and high-income people, they can do it. So I've been a witness of those kind of things, working with some coastal communities in Puerto Rico, in Loíza, actually. And we were trying not to happen. We were even working on this climate adaptation. We worked with the mayors. I took a couple of FEMA coordinators locally there, but the market in some cases is faster than the government bureaucracy. So for the government to provide help to these communities that they were not complying with the law, right? Even when they were living there for more than 30 to 40 years in some cases. So the market did it faster than the government. In some other cases, even the government is promoting these kind of displacements, right? So what they're doing is that they are giving this like tickets. I don't remember the word in English. It's not a ticket, but they're saying to these families, okay, so we will be unable to help you to restore your house. But here you go. You have a new house, not a new house, but a new place where to go. So you're moving out of your municipality, you're getting out of your community, you are disrupting your social life, and probably your kids and all of your social network that you used to have in that community, and we're getting you into another one, right? So these houses are getting empty, not necessarily protected to be used for something beneficial for the community. They're not being destroyed by the government or either. So all of a sudden, most of them are being abandoned there, which is another problem that these communities are facing. So abandoned old houses in the middle of your community. It's not that beautiful, right? And some others, but again, so you will see that high income people are coming to buy it, to make an offer. They are buying these properties and they're building new apartments or things in the places where the same government were saying to the local people that they were unable to help them because they were exposed to a physical hazard, to flood-prone areas or things like that, right? So we're seeing some contradictions as well on that. In terms of the building codes, I know that they are the School of Architecture in Puerto Rico at the University of Puerto Rico and the College of Engineers. They are providing support to the communities, at least on capacities and trainings. They are not doing this for free, obviously, but at least they are doing capacity and workshops, capacity building activities and workshops and trainings for the people to be more aware on these building codes, on how to at least try to comply with them. I don't know if I answered your comment or question, Ricardo, but yeah, okay.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that explanation. There was one comment from Yvette in the Q&A. I'll read that. I didn't see Florida represented in the map. I think it was of climate centers. It would be ideal if your consortium in Florida could share information with one another, especially since we are facing similar issues. Thank you for sharing today. So that was from Yvette.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of this new program of NOAA, the essential component of changing the name of the program that was former RISA, the Regional Integrated Science Assessment, they were more into developing a early warning system, climate projection, climate scenarios. And now all of a sudden, they changed their vision. And now they're promoting more building partnerships and network and make this science available and useful for communities, right? And the only way to do that is again by building this kind of networks and collaboration with other states, communities, academia, as we're doing with Philip in this case. So this little collaboration that we can do, hopefully they can start building other collaborations.
Wonderful. Are there any other questions or comments? We have a few more minutes, so feel free to type those in. I'll give everyone just a couple more moments. In the meantime, as we're wrapping up, Pablo, are there any other final thoughts that you would like to share as we're closing out today?
No, well, something that I can announce is that we're going to be doing like a HIT summit in February 28th and 29th. And we are aiming to include also the Southeast region of the United States. So I think that it's going to be a good opportunity for most of us to start talking about very specific hazards that are also affecting our regions. Not only for a couple of days, but for a couple of months per year. And I know that Florida also have a lot of elderly and share a lot of similarities in terms of the profile and the conditions. You have a lot of Latinos also there with pre-existing health conditions. So again, we are facing similar things that we can learn from each other.